Hello, I'm Dr. Kelly Martin Schuh, Amazon best-selling author, speaker, and women's empowerment coach. And I want to welcome you to our podcast where women with herpes discovered hope, healing, and vibrant health. And today we have a special guest, Janelle Marie Pierce. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's my pleasure.
Wonderful. I'm so happy to have you here. I do have a quick bio, so I want to introduce you to our audience. For those of you who don't know fabulous Janelle, she's the founder and executive director of the STD Project, the STD expert for answers.com, a hepatitis expert for hepatitisc.net, a spokesperson for positivesingles.com, which we'll talk about, I'm sure, an adjunct professor, an eater of Jell-O, and a lover of snow. So she is proof that an STI is not a deal breaker or the end of your world. Rather, it is merely an unexpected curveball in this interesting game we call life. So welcome.
Yay! Sounds so official when it's being read to me.
Yeah, you're like, wow.
I love that.
When I read that yesterday, I saw Lover of the Snow. I was looking outside and it's May and it's snowing. We're in a snowstorm. And so I was thinking, Janelle, you would have loved to be here yesterday.
I would. Oh, I miss the snow too. We just recently, my husband and I moved from Michigan to North Carolina. And I thought, I miss it. But, and it's super hot here all the time. It's like 90 degrees right now outside. As you can see, I'm wearing next to nothing. And I enjoy that because I prefer not to have to think a lot about what I put on every day. And I'm just not super fashion savvy. So if I can just put on a sundress, it looks like I tried really hard, but really it's just my minimalistic approach. So yeah, but I do miss the snow. I just don't miss the cold. I'm like, okay, well, we'll go to the mountains and ski and stuff like that. And then we can come back over to the eastern side of the state and work on our tan.
Oh, fun. That sounds good. Sounds really good. So I guess let's just start where your journey began and you were 16. Can you tell us a little bit about what that was like, what was going on in your life? And, because here you've done so much, but let's go back to the beginning of this journey.
Sure. Yeah. When I was first diagnosed with genital herpes, I was diagnosed visually by my medical practitioner. So for the longest time, I didn't even know which strain I had because that's how it's commonly diagnosed visually. I had an active outbreak, and it was my first worst active outbreak, which of course is very common to have the worst outbreak when you have your first one, if you end up having an outbreak at all. And my medical practitioner at the time shamed me, like it was a really horrible experience. And I was just 16 years old. I mean, high school is one of those tough rites of passage, I always say. Like, it just is a struggle anyways. You're going through so much, trying to figure out your identity and changes and trying to fit in with peer groups and all of that. And my peers were also not super great about it as well. One of the stories that I tell is that I was made to sleep on floors at slumber parties instead of in beds with the other girls because and later I learned it was because they thought they were going to get my infection. So which of course is inaccurate and silly and horrible and just speaks to the stigma so there was things like that was going on that just made me I embodied the stigma. I felt like, well, must be true. This is what society says about me. And even though I didn't really believe that about myself, I didn't see all those things to be true. I really didn't know how to reconcile that two dichotomous, very opposing ideas of how I really truly felt and who I was against what all of the negative misconceptions and connotations, associations were related to people who have an STI. So it took me years to overcome that traumatic experience or experiences. And so finally, when I launched the STD Project, that's when I just kind of quit my career and said, I want to make it so that other people don't have to go through such a grueling process. So it doesn't take years and years and years for them to overcome it. So that, yes, the initial shock is going to be there because our culture sucks a little bit when it comes to STIs and education around sexual health. But if they find my resource, then I can help walk them through it and let them know that, like, you will totally be all right. and it is not as big of a deal as it seems, and it will not impact your relationships and so on. So yeah, full circle. It came from 16 years old to now here I am. I'll be 35 this year. So it took me a little ways.
Yeah, it took me a long time to, I mean, I was diagnosed a little later than you in my 20s, but I'll tell you, I mean, I think of like the years of, you know, just trying to date and just feeling different. And, you know, bottom line, what I tell people is that we all have stuff, like we all have stuff that is embarrassing or is shameful, or, you know, everyone that's living a human existence, there's going to be suffering. And I love how you said, you know, this is just, it's a curveball. It really is a curveball. And it impacts people's lives in different ways. But in the end, it is something that's totally manageable and that you can totally have a normal life. And so, yeah, we're on the same page.
Mm-hmm.
There. I'm curious. So back then, how did your friends know? I mean, did you come out and disclose to someone? And then, like, I'm kind of curious because I know a lot of people, their friends don't know. So I'm kind of curious how that happened. And
yeah, I told my best friend at the time, right after I was diagnosed, and she then proceeded to tell whomever. And she would also tell potential suitors and things, like guys would, this was just kind of typical, I don't know, teenager kind of thing, but guys would come up to her and be like, hey, you know, who's your friend? And like, I really like her. Can you tell her I like her and stuff like that? And she would warn them and say, oh yeah, you don't want to mess with her. She's just going to hurt you. She's just going to infect you. She has an infection. She has an STD, all of this. So yeah, needless to say, she wasn't a good friend and we're no longer friends. And, you know, I don't hold like this anger, hostility toward her because it was cruel stuff, but it was a product of her ignorance and her lack of information about STIs, how common they are and all of that. So I no longer feel that kind of animosity or that blame that we tend to want to do when we get diagnosed. Like, who gave it to me? Why didn't they tell me? Whose fault is this? It's just a way to dispel all of those uncomfortable emotions that we're feeling, as opposed to just looking at it practically and saying, okay, what does this mean for me? And I think it's because really you're reconciling also the stigma, of course, which makes it even more tough, but you're also mourning the loss of your non-STI positive self. So you have this vision of who you are people think like, oh, I'm clean, quote unquote, which is a horrible thing to say. We don't say that. And of course, it's medically inaccurate and whatever, but people will say that. And so that's how they think about themselves sexually and their sexual health, and that they're not a risk, or there isn't a risk of a concern for them. And then immediately, as soon as you're diagnosed, it's like that totally flips on its end. And then you think, okay, now what? Now I'm going to have to talk about this dating wise. Like, how are you going to disclose this to people and have these conversations? And you feel like you're the one now that people have to watch out for, and like the monster, the scary person. And in all reality, somebody else may have an STI too that you are totally unaware of and that you can't even test for. I mean, just the likelihood, once you become sexually active and of encountering someone with an STI, is so high that it's really more about just being aware and educated and thoughtful, mindful about your health and what you need to do in order to reduce whatever risk that you're concerned about. But then at the end of the day, it still might happen, even if you reduce risk. So, but anyways, that was a really long answer to your short question. But yeah, initially it was friends telling people. And actually, so to come back to that, because I totally went off on a tangent, is that for the longest time after that, so like for the couple of years that I was still in connection with some of these people and people knew each other and whatever, but once I graduated, I didn't tell a single soul. Okay. And I also think, now thinking about it, and I don't know that I've ever even put this together, which is kind of profound, but I think that also played a part into why for a little while I didn't even disclose to new partners. So I totally was unethical. I didn't do the right thing by them and their sexual health, and I didn't always disclose. I would disclose after the fact, like ask for forgiveness, not for permission kind of concept, because I had no idea how to do that. I was terrified of the response, and that may have actually contributed to it. I can't say 100%, but if I piece it together, I'm sure that horrible reaction from one of the first people I told, including my medical practitioner, whom of course you're going to assume that would be the most empathetic and the most.
They weren't.
And they weren't. So it's like the couple of people I had told, other than my mother who took me, who was really thoughtful and sweet, but it's like, when you're a teenager, your parents don't know anything and they don't get it, and
Right,
whatever.
exactly.
So the couple of
They're
people
like,
that I
almost
told,
their love doesn't count. Like, oh, you don't
exactly.
like, okay, thanks. I know you love me no matter what, but
you're supposed to say that, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like, of course you're going to say that. You're my mom, right? Although
exactly.
I have talked to people who have disclosed to, someone near and dear, like a family member that doesn't get it, so that's not always the case. So I'm so glad that you did. If anyone batting for you, that you did have your mom.
Interesting too is I had some folks who, one family member who said she felt so sorry for me. I'm so sorry that you had to go through this. And I actually didn't love that response, even though I know it came from a good place and it was well intended. I thought that again speaks to the pervasiveness of the stigma, because it seems as though it's something awful, like something awful happened. And really, it's not that big of a deal. It's no different than contracting any other kind of infection or malady that nobody really wants an issue with their body, but our bodies are susceptible to any manner of things, and these things just happen. So, and we don't have the same response to somebody who gets diagnosed with poison ivy, let's say, for example. So that's, you can transmit it and things like that. And, although I guess maybe a little bit, but I wasn't so sure that I loved the entire, like, oh, that just is so awful kind of approach. Because I just didn't feel like at the time, by the time I had told these additional family members, I didn't feel like it was awful anymore. I was in a place where it didn't impact me. And that's kind of why I wanted to do this work. It's because I'm like, man, how little it impacted me once I stopped allowing it to be this giant game changer. Once I said, wait a minute, this is silly. None of my partners care. Hasn't impacted my ability to be successful, my ability to have healthy, awesome relationships, both partners wise, as well as just extended relationships and things. Like, it just has not made a lick of a difference. So unless I allow it to, unless I make it this big, huge, giant thing. So some of the culpability, I think, is on us, but I totally understand why that's where we naturally go when we get diagnosed.
Yeah. When I coach women, I share with them that it really is, men and women, it is what you make it mean. We, as humans, we are meaning making machines. And so you can take two people in have the same exact event and watch what happens with two different people. You can take like two people that grew up in the same household and the same experiences, and one becomes uber successful and the other one doesn't. And even if traumatic things happen and you watch, and really what it comes down to is, what did that person mean? What did they make that event mean? And so herpes is just the same. I mean, if you're making it mean that you're going to be alone for the rest of your life and no one's going to love you, and that you focus on the fear, then it's going to be really hard to get your life back on track. But if you make it mean, oh, wow, this is an incredibly common, infection, and I can live with it and I can overcome it and I can still be myself. In fact, I could actually be a better version of me. Maybe I become more compassionate, more loving. And so, I always point towards, what are you making herpes mean? And what could you make it mean to come from a more empowered place? So,
and I think that some people like kind of look at that and are like, that's hokey, or it sounds cliche. And I get that. And that's just a way to be like, I'm not ready for that. And that's fine. And it doesn't have to be all uber flowery.
No, it doesn't.
However, it's like, at the very least, you're going to gain some additional knowledge. At the very least, you have to admit, you never thought this would happen to you. Nobody ever does. Nobody says, I expected I was going to be diagnosed with herpes. I thought I'd also have something else too. I mean, nobody really says that. So at the very, very minimum base, it's like you learn something new, and you can't help but grow from that. I mean, any additional knowledge, any additional piece of information helps us formulate a new perspective. So that in and of itself is positive right there. I can't even conceive of a negative way of looking at that. So it's like, then you keep adding on it. Like now, like you said, you're more empathetic. The next time somebody approaches you with the story that you don't understand in a situation that maybe even it's not even directly related. Maybe it's not an STI, but it's something they're going through that they're really struggling with, and they're struggling with stigma. Maybe somebody with a mental illness or something along those lines, or all of those things. Then all of a sudden, immediately, you're like, wow, I just went through something kind of like that too. And it's just, yeah. So it's like, even though I know that some people respond with the, I want to say screw the world and I hate all of these things, it's like you can't help. If you really start looking at it logically, you're learning something and you start from there. And then it is quite positive. It really does change you and impact you in a positive way, I think. And it encourages you to think about your partners, yourself, in a way that you probably haven't before. At least it did for me. And I have to believe that it does for so many folks.
Yeah. Well, I know that in our community, one of the greatest fears, I think that some of the two greatest fears is the fear of transmission, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the fear of disclosure, right? Those seems to be the thing that come up first and foremost. So let's talk a little bit about that, especially with what you're doing and your cause with the STD Project. You want to take either of those on first about your experience in disclosing and what you would share with somebody, or transmission and that fear and how you've been educating people?
Well, I guess let's start with the timeline of like maybe disclosing first and then transmission, right?
Yeah.
So of course, I've had people ask me the same question, because the reason I share that I didn't always disclose initially is because I believe it's a problem. And and I know now, since launching the STD Project and hearing folks' stories, that this is a common problem. And I'm not the only one. I wasn't some horrible person. I was doing something that wasn't right. But it's a symptom of a larger problem, and there's a reason why we're doing it. We can't address the problem and we can't fix it if we don't address and acknowledge that it's there, right? So it's not a way in which to encourage folks like, go ahead, don't tell your partners because she didn't, so it's okay, because it's totally an unethical thing to do, right? So anytime you're putting someone at risk, if you're being ethical, you need to disclose to them in advance. And I think that's the scariest conversation. But at that point, it helps build some intimacy. It's a conversation that will eventually empower you, even though it never really gets super easy, I don't think. I think there's always, and it's because, like you said, early on, you were saying that, everybody has something going on that they're a little embarrassed about. So there's always going to be things, sometimes they're deal breakers for the person on the other end. And sometimes they're just things that they're deciding like, oh yeah, I can tolerate that. It's not a big deal. And I think a lot of times with an STI, that's the response, is not as big of a deal as we think it is. But it is something that they have to decide whether that's a risk they're willing to consider at that point. The same would be true if you had a parent with an addiction who lived with you that you were taking care of or something. Or, there's all sorts of things that are not necessarily the best scenario or not what we want to share personally about ourselves, but they all come up when you're starting to learn about a new partner or partners. So I think the thing to remember that there's other things, that you're not the only one with something that you're worried about. Is the other person going to accept? It's no different than saying I have halitosis, and you're sitting across the dinner table from someone you haven't gotten that close yet. Right. And what are you going to do? And there's nothing else you can do about it. You're working on it. You're doing as much as you can to help your mental health and things like that. But at the end of the day, that may be something that you're dealing with. So, who knows? There's a huge plethora of things I could list off, but and that's what I'm going to just be honest. The conversation never gets a whole lot easier, but I think if you go through it from a fairly logical standpoint and do steps, and so I always say the least emotional you can be about it is probably the best, because if you go into it and with the caveat that the first couple of disclosures that I did, I was a crying, blubbering mess. Like
I was too.
You too? It's just ridiculous.
God.
Like, I have something to tell you. And, oh my gosh.
My partner thought he was like, she must have cancer or something.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Yes. And it's like, and all of their responses were, that's it? Like, that's all you had to tell me? Like,
that's all you got?
Who you are. Right. I'm like, what do you mean? Like, that's such a big deal. That's a lot of folks' natural reaction. There's nothing wrong with, you can't help if that's how you're feeling, because that's your truth at the time.
Yeah.
But I would encourage you to think about it really hard. And if you're listening to this, if you're doing your research, you're trying to seek help anyways, you're already kind of on that path. Like, I need to work through this. So you're doing your due diligence and you're doing stuff to help yourself. So use that as a way, as an empowerment factor. And like, the less crazy seeming you are about it, then the less crazy seeming they're going to think it is too, because if you're like, just matter of fact, I just feel like it's less likely for them to have a horrible response. Now, some people just might. I mean, that does happen, but it happens less often than you would think. I've not actually ever had a negative reaction. Some of the
I
folks
haven't either.
You haven't
I
either?
feel really blessed, but I know that.
Love that.
Yeah, I know that those rejections do happen. So we've got to be real about that. Like, how do you handle rejection? But at the same time, my experience and talking in the community is that more often than not, the talk goes really well. And as you said, like you and I both, when we first started, we were blubbering messes, and I still was accepted. So you go, okay, like you can even really screw up. And if the person is right for you, they're going to be right. They're going to have your back.
Right. And even then, they might not be right for you forever too. A lot of folks feel like, this is the one person that was okay, so I don't want to ever have to do this again, so now I have to stay with them forever. And then they find themselves in unhealthy relationships. Like, no, that definitely does not mean that, because there will probably be others too who are going to be totally willing to consider that risk and to walk through it with you. And that's, when we think about the rejection too, I always say, like, remember, people get rejected for a number of different reasons, and we usually aren't privy to that answer of why. We usually don't get to say, okay, this happens in all different other kinds of rejections too. I have a book, the Book of Rejection Letters, which is really great, from all over, for different rejections that people have received for things. And you don't always get an answer of why you were given a no. So in job interviews and stuff, you just don't get called back. Sometimes you get a letter saying we chose another candidate, but you don't even know why they chose another candidate. In dating, you just don't get called. Sometimes you get ghosted and nobody calls you back, and you have no idea why. At least in this scenario,
We both have cats coming. That's great.
I know, right? I was like, I was thinking the same thing. I was seeing yours. I'm like, oh, mine will probably do the same.
Exactly.
When I'm busy, that's when she thinks like it's her turn. So, but you never know. You don't always get the answer. And the cool thing about when you are, if and when you are, and this is easier said and easier conceptually than to just accept it and be okay with it. But when you are rejected as a result of an HSV diagnosis or any other infection, then you actually know the reason. Like, they were just not ready and at a place that they wanted to accept that risk or consider that risk. And that's all right, because it actually has nothing to do with you as a person. It wasn't because you didn't make enough money, you weren't hot enough, you weren't good in bed. Like, it has really nothing to do with you at all, which is kind of cool. So I'm like trying to keep
I'll interject here with something funny. Is one of my absolute best friends, she's from South Florida, and she's really into fashion. Like, she loves fashion. And I'll never forget, this is years ago. She told me she was dating this guy and she really liked him, but he showed up in like sneakers. And I was like, yeah, what's the big deal? She's like, he wore sneakers and like a t-shirt, and this was a date. And I was like, so this is a great example of what a silly thing, right? But he wasn't into the guy because he
had no idea, I'm sure.
So great example of like, like sometimes he probably has no idea why he never got the call, like the yes, right? And so sometimes it can be such simple things like the way you laugh or right.
Totally.
And so we've got so many potential deal breakers, and and people, as you said, you often don't get to know the answer. So it may why you were rejected. It might have to do with herpes. It might not.
Exactly. And if they actually tell you, yeah, that's just a no for me, then move along. There's so many bazillion people in the world. Even if you were so into this person, like there's just so many fish in the sea. I hate that stupid cliche, but I mean, rejection sucks. But that's true. So many, and like, especially now with online dating and things, and like, whatever. There's so much opportunity. So don't let that make such a big deal. I mean, and I've had, and I'm sure you have too, And there's one interview on the site that I'll just never forget, is a woman said, until I read your site, I've not dated for 9 years. I barely leave my house, all these things. And now I finally feel I've sat here for the last 8 hours reading everything you've ever written. And like, I'm going to do it. Like, I don't, I almost feel silly. And I'm like, this is exactly why we're doing the work we're doing, because it's like, and it's not, I understand it, but it is silly. Like, don't do that. Don't hide in the house and don't not have the conversation, because it's certainly not going to get any easier if you don't have the conversation at all.
Yeah.
I learned that the hard way. Like, when I finally started actually having the conversation, I'm like, man, like, now it's like I'm starting from scratch, and I've been dealing with this for years. And so I'm just starting to do it the right way. And it makes it even harder because I don't have any experience. And so, yeah, to have it and to walk through that and just tell them plain and simple, like, that this is, and the other thing too, is they may have something to share as well.
Exactly.
Excuse me. I wouldn't yeah, they may have something to share, and you never know until you start talking and doing that. So this cat, do you see this?
Oh, I know. I've got
like,
mine finally settled
ridiculous.
down. He's right next to it. But
anyway,
a great example is that my husband just recently this week wrote a blog about his perspective when I first told him. And for him, one of the things that he was embarrassed by is he had a history of alcohol abuse. And he was sober, and he's like, this could be a deal breaker. And he shared this in this blog of like, look, like, she came to the table with herpes. Well, I was also a risk for her because, what if I went back and so it really brings that perspective of our partners might have something that are deal breakers for us. And obviously for us, it was not a deal breaker. And, I was so fortunate that I met my man and all of that. But yeah, it could be a deal breaker on the other side that you don't even know about.
Right, exactly. And you may not even know right away, even when you first disclose. I mean, you just learn things slowly over time. It's just the natural organic process of dating someone and learning about them and all of that. So, and then I think you asked about transmission, right?
Yeah.
So after you've done this and you've done your due diligence and you've been super responsible and yay you, and I've told my partner, now I'm absolutely terrified of transmitting it. And I've had other people tell me that too. So now I've told, but I would be devastated if they contracted it, and so on and so forth. And that, I just think, is something that takes a little time to accept and move past, because nobody wants to be the reason for somebody else not feeling great, right? Like, if I would feel horrible if I get frequent outbreaks. So I'm on Valtrex prescription now, and I also take L-lysine, an amino acid, for folks who aren't aware of what that is, and you can Google it, and so on and so forth. But anyway, so I do a lot to try and avoid the frequent outbreaks. And if my husband had to deal with it, like, I would feel bad, but he knows, and he is well aware. He knows the risks. Has read all of the information. And that's kind of part of that disclosure process, is letting them know some good suggestions for resources that you find are helpful and aren't stigmatized or too factual, or just whatever resource that you think that will be helpful for them, you can point out. And then if they have any questions down the line, let them know that you're always open to answering questions now or in the future. But at the end of the day, they're making that decision for themselves. And so almost feeling petrified about it, and being so worried and so upset about potentially transmitting it, is also not putting the confidence in them that they're capable of making a decision that's best for them. So that's taking too much ownership and responsibility of something that they've already made the decision for them. And if they, and that's the thing too, is you may not get frequent outbreaks, but they may end up contracting it and getting super frequent outbreaks, or vice versa. Maybe you get them all the time, maybe I get them all the time, but at this point, my husband hasn't been tested, so actually he could have it, and we don't know, and it just is irrelevant to him, and he doesn't get outbreaks if he does. So whatever. But and we're monogamous and in that kind of relationship, so we don't have a need to get tested at this point. But anyhow, I think that's the one concrete thought, is that being too upset or worried about that, first of all, then you're not focusing on the present and enjoying your relationship with that person because you're always so petrified of transmitting it. But secondarily, then you're not putting your trust and faith in them, that they have the power and ability to make a decision that suits them. And so that's also not trusting that if that were to happen, they would be able to handle it in an appropriate, effective way, and that you would be there to help them answer questions and all those things anyhow. So I think that's one of those things that, and there's also risk that you're accepting. So we run this risk, I guess, for lack of a better word, of once we get diagnosed, of always being like worried that we're going to hurt somebody else and hurt or infect someone else, especially when we're in that mindset, we're thinking hurt. But we have to be aware that there are 30 plus STIs out there. Okay. So according to the World Health Organization, I won't get super statisticky, but I think these are a couple
I think it's
relevant.
important. No, a little bit.
A little bit, just for the fact of, I think it helps calm folks' fear. And so according to the World Health Organization, there are 30 plus STIs out there. A regular panel only tests for about 5 infections. So when you say, I would like a full panel, I want to be tested for all the things, test me for everything you can, you're only getting tested for 5, 6 infections at a time, sometimes 4. You just have to ask which ones you're being tested for, but no more than that. And there are infections that you can't even be tested for. There aren't tests out there available. So yes, you are aware of something that you have and you don't want to transmit it to your partner, but naturally they could have something that you are unaware of and that you wouldn't even know about, and that they couldn't even prevent or be aware of. So there's a mutual risk always in that. So I think stripping that away, like you're the one that they have to watch out for, you're the one who could infect them, knowing that there's inherent risk in everything we do. And of course, then when we're sexually active with someone, there's going to be risk involved because you're sharing your body very intimately. You're sharing fluids, you're sharing skin cells, tiny cuts and tears occur that you don't even feel. There's all this interaction and exchange going on. So naturally there's going to be some risk, but there should be, in a good relationship, there should be some mutual reward as well. That's why we have sex. It's enjoyable, feels good, and there's all these additional benefits socially and whatever, exactly. Like, let's do it. Let's get it on, but let's do it. And let's be totally aware of what's going on. And so that we can do it in a proper way. And we just have, our system, especially Western, we just don't have comprehensive, inclusive, empathetic education out there. And that's, we're a product of our environment, lack of information. But I think if we stop being so worried, like, I don't want to transmit herpes to my husband either, but at the end of the day, it may happen, and we'll just be okay with it. I mean, I won't love it, but it's whatever, I could contract something from, actually, I did get an abnormal pap smear. So that means HPV when we first started dating. And that was a risk that he can't be tested for HPV. That's one of the infections that he can't be tested for. So there was no way of knowing, and that potentially poses a risk. So I just had a new pap smear and I'm waiting for those results to see if that's cleared in my system. So there's a great example of, but I'm not going at him like, oh my gosh, you gave me HPV, you horrible person, we're all gonna die, whatever. So it's just a mindset, kind of like you said, how you view the situation, that's gonna mold, I think, how everybody feels about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. I mean, we're constantly exposed to things. I mean, you and I were just talking right before we got on this recording part, and both of us last week had a bit of a cold. It's like we contracted something, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's stuff in our environment all the time, and some things, that we can contract, or look at things like diabetes. You do lifestyle management and make some changes. And so it's like, I think this is part of the human condition. That transmission piece, I love how you share, there's a trust element of like trusting that your partner has made a savvy choice for them and allow them to receive your love, right? It's like, You
I
know,
love
talking
that.
about the person that you said had been abstinent for 9 years. Well, I look at that and I go, you know what? There's someone out there that needs that person's love, that needs that person's connection, and they're looking for them. They're looking for that person. But if you're at home all alone and keeping this all to yourself, you don't get to be the person that somebody else is looking for, right? And so, in that way, in a strange, weird way, you could almost say that's selfish.
Right. I was thinking the same thing. I was like, yeah, it's a shame because you were stopping the world from enjoying you. You're unique. I mean, the odds of you being born and things, they've calculated this number and it's so minute and like 1 in a bazillion trillion, whatever. And the odds of you specifically being born when you were, who you are, all of those things. And it's like that, I mean, again, I know there are folks who think this stuff is hokey, but if like there isn't a reason, then what is the purpose? Like if there is not some higher reason of some sort, and it doesn't necessarily mean you have to believe in God, you could be Buddhist, I don't care what you want to call it or how you want to label it. But if there is not a purpose for you, I mean, it just doesn't even make any logical sense. From a logical standpoint, I don't think it makes sense. Not even just spiritually, but yes, like you are meant to do something and to impact someone in some sort of way. So go out there and do it. And please don't let this stop you because it's just ignorance. It's just sheer ignorance. We're ignorant about a lot of things. You and I were just talking about whether or not global warming was happening because of the weather changes and stuff like that. And there's just a lot of lack of education, a lot of lack of information. And especially with social media, it makes it hard to even discern what is accurate information. My husband just sent me an article this morning that was like, herpes ends relationships. And I was like, oh my gosh, the title of this article, like this is going to be rich. And it was one of the herpes cures. Herpes can be cured and this is how you cure it. And it's this fear mongering.
That's a juicy conversation, right?
So much like this fear mongering. It's like folks are harnessing how people feel after a diagnosis and, you know, just taking your money basically because there is no cure at this point. I mean,
yes, I'm so glad you're saying that, you know, let's both, you know, say, I mean, there isn't a cure right now. And I'm sure you get them too on your website. I constantly get these spams of like Dr. Emoji or doctor that did this and did this and he cured me and God bless him. And it's like, people, I know you want a cure and maybe someday there will be one, but right now there isn't. And so don't be, there's these people that are scams and they're just pulling at your heartstrings. You know, focus on what you can control. Like, you know, be healthy in your diet, be healthy in your lifestyle, like rebuilding your immunity. That's how you can manage this. But I've had so many people say, yeah, but isn't there a cure? I read online and I'm here to say I haven't found one yet. So Janelle, you haven't either?
Nope. No, ma'am. Sure haven't. No. And I would take it if there were minimal, I guess I should even preface that if there were minimal risks and things like that, I think it would depend on what the side effects were of potentially taking like a vaccine. There's vaccines potentially coming out. There's some hope that way, some most positive hope we've seen in a long time. But the last I read, even the vaccines are for folks who have not been diagnosed with HSV1 or 2. So it's not going to cure an already present infection. So yeah, I mean, I certainly would consider it for the sake of that would reduce transmission. I am doing other things to reduce transmission risk, but if that helped and there wasn't some giant crazy, you have a high risk of getting breast cancer if you take this cure or something like, I mean, who knows? Sometimes some of those things do come with some additional warnings and concerns that you have to decide whether it works for you and your partner. And that's actually what we talk about on the STD Project a lot is the idea behind of sexual responsibility. So people talk about sexual health a lot. And the misconception is that in order to be sexually healthy, you have to be free of all infection. And there's actually no way, if you're sexually active, of knowing you're free of all infection because of the way or of the stuff that I shared earlier about the number of infections and they're not being tested for everything. So sexual health does not mean free of all infection, but I also like to put a giant umbrella above sexual health that includes sexual responsibility, or that sexual responsibility is at the top. And what that means is if you are fully aware of all of your risks and you have this comprehensive knowledge and you're fully aware of the ways in which to reduce the risk, should you choose to, then you and your partners will make decisions that are best in those scenarios. And that's up to each individual and each partners to make a decision that's right for them. So we don't say, like, you should always use condoms. You should always get tested before and after each new partner. If you want to reduce your risk as much as possible, those are things to do that will reduce your risk as much as possible. Those are part of a comprehensive safer sex regimen, but not everybody wants to do that. And if you are totally aware of your risks, then rock that out. Do what is best for you in your relationship and relationships. And then at that point, I think you feel less freaked out when and if something happens. That's where I'd love us all to get. We're just, a ways away from that, apparently.
Yeah. I mean, that sexual responsibility is so important. And within the context of a monogamous relationship, or even beyond a monogamous relationship, it's like you take the risks that are most appropriate for you. I had a woman reach out to me one time. She says, I'm so confused because my partner uses condoms, but I want to get pregnant. So how do I get pregnant? I was like, well, then you got to take off the condom. Like, so yes, there is more of a risk. Like these are things and we can laugh at it, but I can also understand like the pain and suffering. She's like, not like, how do we do this? And to let couples know that you can have a normal baby, like by having one person positive and one person negative, it doesn't mean that you can't have a normal baby, or two people that are positive, or whatever that looks like. So yes, you do it. Women, if you want to get pregnant, you're going to have to take the condom off, right?
Right.
It does up the risk a little bit, but when we're talking about it, I mean, we're talking, if we're talking about a woman, who's positive for HSV and then a man that's negative, I mean, we can get it down to single digit risk. I mean, we're talking about, if we were I tell women, and men, if you were in Vegas and you had a 96% chance of doubling your money, would you put some money down? Right? Most people would. Is there a risk that you lose it? Yeah. Life is a gamble. I mean, we drive cars. And we have the choice. Do we put the seatbelt on or not? Right? And so, so I love that personal responsibility and partner responsibility. And then there's also some logic in there of like, the one thing we can't do is protect our partners at 100%, but give them the opportunity to make the decisions, right? Give information, and then for you too, right? So I love
that analogy. I use that car analogy all the time with media interviews. Like, we don't even think about it anymore because we want to get to point A to point B, because that's our priority. That's what we care about. So we do things to help reduce. We use our turn signal. We look before we change lanes. We wear our seatbelt. All of these things. We get our oil changed regularly, stuff to help for our car to function well and for us to get down the road as safe as possible. But you still get in accidents sometimes. People get in really bad accidents. Sometimes they're mild. All different kinds of manner of things can happen when you get in that car barreling down the road at 60 to 80 miles or whatever an hour on the highway. So, but we don't even think about it in some giant concern, because we're all doing it. We all need the we need the income, the reward of whatever it is, if we're going to a job or we're going to an event or whatever. The only reason we think about STIs in the context that we do, like, oh my gosh, this doom and gloom and I can't get an STI, is because of stigma, because of our culture. Exactly. Otherwise, we'd be like, yep, these happen sometimes. And I would prefer for it not to happen. I'd prefer to not crash my car. I would prefer to not have, my tire come off or my tire go flat because I hit a nail. I would prefer for all of these things not to happen, of course. They're not ideal. But at the end of the day, when it happens, I might say a couple of swear words, and then I call the tow truck or AAA or whatever, call my husband to come pick me up off the side of the road. You do what you got to do, and it's not, and I don't go into it the next time, unless yes, barring the strange circumstances of like a really horrific accident where people then are, trauma and stuff like that. And there is an element of trauma to an STI diagnosis because of the extensiveness of how we portray them, how our culture and our media has portrayed them. And all of that too, we didn't talk about this yet, but all of that really is propaganda, especially when we're talking about herpes. When you ask people, in surveys and things, whether or not, what's the thing that they want least to happen? Like, what are they most scared of happening when they get sexually active? It's getting herpes specifically, not contracting an STI. It's not chlamydia. It's not even HIV, because people just don't think it'll happen to them. And they know the numbers and things are fewer, and we just don't talk about it in the same way. A lot of work has been done to reduce the stigma, even though after Charlie Sheen announced his HIV positive status, I realized like, oh, nope, we still have a lot more work to do too there. I digress. But even so, that's the biggest fear. And it's because partially because a pharmaceutical company wanted to make money off of an antiviral medication. So if people aren't afraid of herpes and they don't care that they contracted herpes, well, nobody's going to buy the antiviral medication to treat it, because it's no big deal. So we got to make them care about it. We have to make them not
You have to make them scared.
Exactly. And fear is a lot of what happens in marketing. If you think about products and things like that, getting old, for example, is huge. Everything we do, our face cream and our everything, heaven forbid we age and grow and become amazing individuals. Like, heaven forbid we gain a wrinkle on our face, like go get that Botox. And I'm a culprit of these things too. I mean, I'm putting my face cream on diligently. I have a friend who's an esthetician. I've even tried Botox. Like, so I'm speaking for myself when I'm saying that, but it's fear. It's fear of getting old. And so the same thing applies when we're talking about herpes and medication. And it's not to say don't take the medication, because I prefer less outbreaks myself. So fewer and less in severity as well. But it's only as scary as it's been made, really.
What do you think in bringing up the stigma? So you've had this since you were 16. I've had this since I was 23. What the trends in stigma? Do you think it's getting better? Do you think it's getting worse? Do you think it's about the same? I mean, we're both out in the public eye. In some ways, I could see, maybe we're making some slow progress, but I can't say that I've seen a big breakthrough. What about you?
No, I definitely haven't. I mean, I would love to say, I feel the work we're doing is significant and that we're impacting people at the individual level. And and I get those emails all the time. I know you do too. And so that makes it worthwhile. But from a large perspective, culturally, it has made such a small dent. I mean, that is still, a lot of people will ask me why I chose to label the STD project the STD project as opposed to STI, and why we still use those terms. And a lot of it is because the layman is going to, the regular everyday person out there who's seeking and needs the information probably more, is going to type in STD, not STI.
Right. You're absolutely right.
So when they Google that, I want to make sure I have plenty of articles and research and things like that includes that, so I come up on that search engine. So they find my resource and find empathetic, inclusive information, and not just the clinical stuff. That's great too. But the people who know STI are the sexual health experts, psychologists and therapists and doctors and stuff. And those are the ones who ask me that question. Like, I can't believe you're not using that. And we use it interchangeably. We use STI on the website too. But it's like, because the stigma is still there, because we're still talking about STDs like a horrible thing, that's what everybody knows. There just has not been enough education out there. And even though, so now this is kind of interesting. I just was talking about this. I wrote a couple of articles for the National Coalition of STD Directors talking about how us as educators and clinicians can do better. It was just STD Awareness Month in April, as you know, and for the last 5 years since launching the STD Project, every campaign I ever see is like, go get tested, prevention. So it's perpetuating this idea. They're not intending to do this, but it's perpetuating this idea that sexual health means free of all infection.
Right.
And and the problem with the getting tested initiatives, it's not that we shouldn't be getting tested. I'm all for that, but no one's going to get tested if they don't think it's a relevant risk. They don't think it's a concern for them. If they still believe that this is something that happens to certain kinds of people, other people, not them, not the people they're sleeping with, so we have to get to that. We have to erode those misconceptions first before anybody will ever go out and get tested. And if people are so petrified of a positive diagnosis, they'd rather not know. If they're not having active lesions or sores or something visible and uncomfortable or something that they're noticing is abnormal for them, like a discharge, they're not going to get tested. They would rather not know. And if we don't strip away,
often their doctors will back them up. You don't want to get tested. I've heard that so many times. And we just had on the show, Dr. Sheila Luanzan, who's a gynecologist. And I said, I just want to verify professionally, are you encouraged if someone does not have any symptoms, they're asymptomatic, do you encourage testing? And she said, actually, we are not encouraged to test if there are no signs and symptoms. So it's this dance. It's like, if we were, promoting getting tested in a way that really, I don't know, then, and herpes was included, what would happen, I think in a very fast amount of time, everyone would discover that so many people have it, that then it really isn't a big deal. So it's like the chicken before the egg. And like, I don't know, right?
I totally agree. And I have heard that argument so many times from medical practitioners that they don't. And I've had people had to argue with their practitioners, the ones who are like, I really do want an HSV test. And they're like, no, we don't want to do a blood test. We don't do them if you don't have symptoms. Well, the majority of the most common symptom of STIs is no symptom at all. That is across the board. Oh, sorry, that was my dog. Stop that. That was across the board for all. Oh my goodness. So I just put out a bird feeder yesterday, we just realized we had mating doves. And so I put it out so they could hop in and get some stuff and whatever. And I put it right next to the window, of course. And now there's got to be a bird in the feeder and she's barking at it. It's kind of funny. Sorry, honey, you're not going to get the bird. But the life of a puppy. Anyway, where was I? Go figure. That, that they're not testing if you don't have symptoms, but the most common symptoms, no symptoms. So people don't realize how common it is. So HPV is a really awesome example of this. So 80% of all people by the age of 50 will have had an HPV infection at some point in their lives. 80%. So the majority of people. And when you get an abnormal pap smear, the vast majority, like 98.9% or something like that, are all a result of an HPV infection. So an abnormal pap smear is a result of an HPV infection. And most people aren't told that. You just are told you have an abnormal infection. They're not telling you the culprit of it intentionally, because there was another article I read recently that was written by a medical practitioner who said, I don't have the time to explain it, because what happens is as soon as I tell them that they're abnormal pap smears because of HPV, your pap smear, I guess, let me go backwards. So a pap smear only looks for abnormal cells on your cervix. It doesn't actually test for an infection at all. You don't get tested for STIs. You don't get tested for HPV. You don't get tested for anything. But if you do have an abnormal pap smear, it means you have some abnormal cells on your cervix. What causes the abnormal cells is an HPV infection. They oftentimes want to follow up with a new pap smear within 3 to 6 months afterwards, because they're looking to see if those abnormal cells are still visible. If they're not, that means your body cleared the infection on its own, as it typically does with HPV. But most doctors will just say you have an abnormal pap smear, and that's normal. Your abnormal pap smear is so common that we call it normal. It's not a big deal, because most people clear the infection. It doesn't turn into cervical cancer. But the problem with not telling anyone is then everybody walks around thinking, I've never had an STI. I'm clean, using that horrible word again. And they don't realize, no, you've had an STI already. Your abnormal pap smear is an STI. You've had one just like I have one. And we're all like in this boat together. Yay.
Exactly.
And then the doctors say, like, we don't want to explain this, because as soon as you do, then the immediate questions come that they don't have the time really, because they're overloaded. They don't have enough doctors to care for their giant patient load. And then it's the immediate shock value that happens when you're diagnosed with an STI, or when someone tells you you've had one, is like, where did I get it from? How did I get it? What does that mean? It's immediate craziness that occurs. And so instead of having to deal with that, rather than having to walk people through, unless you've only had one partner, there's no way of knowing who you contracted it from. There's no way to test if you're a woman and you contracted it. There's no way. Well, that's what the example I'm using, I guess. So if you're a woman and you contracted it, then males can't get tested. Or if you're a woman who has sex with women, you still aren't going to know which woman it came from, but that's less likely. Anyways, so yeah, there's really no way of knowing. You can't blame it. There's really no origin. It doesn't, you have no way of knowing if your partner cheated, which that's the first question too. One of the first questions. I mean, this whole plethora and the doctors are like, we just don't, instead of having to go there and walking everybody through the same thing, we just say it's an abnormal pap smear and that's it. So that lack of information, that lack of telling people, that lack of testing, then it just continues to increase.
It self-perpetuates, right?
Mm-hmm, exactly.
Yeah, and it's not like we can, say, okay, everyone has to go get tested. But it's like, what would that do to the education at large? If we could just have a campaign where everyone just gets tested for what can be tested, and we all get this wake-up call that we're all in the same boat, right? Because such a small percentage of people would show up truly negative, right? Then it's like, oh, and we could actually open our mouth and have these conversations, like the stigma would go out the door. It really would.
And as soon as you tell people this, like I've had women get angry at me and get so defensive, like, oh no, where are you getting this information from? That's not what an abnormal pap smear is. And they would have told me. And it absolutely is. Like, I'm sorry, I know that your doctor didn't tell you. I know that you don't want to hear this from me because it's still, even people I know and care about still want to see me in a different box, and like, no, you are dealing with this and good for you for being the person you are, but that's not me. So that's not my situation.
It goes back to, it's not me, it's not possible, right?
Exactly. I was just speaking at this college and this was really entertaining. Like I told the audience at one point in time, right? So these are like college age students, so anywhere from 18 to 25 probably at tops. Well, we know that by the numbers, 1 in 2 18 to 25-year-olds contract an STD, so STI, STD, some curable, some long-term. And so I told the audience, and I said, well, guys, half of you have had an STI. And the entire audience lit up. Like Twitter was like, oh no, she didn't. And I can't believe that. And it was cool because there was this rap artist Jacques was sitting on the stage with me, and he's like, oh yeah, I'm clean, just to let the ladies know. And, I've been tested, I'm negative, I don't have anything. And he said, I don't have anything a couple of times. And finally I took the mic and I said, there's no way you know that for sure. I said,
wow.
I'm going to call you out and tell you, like, there's no actual way because you can't be tested for everything. So, and again, they're like, I can't believe she just told Jacques that he might have an STD, like blah, blah, blah. And then I said, in your defense, what you're probably trying to say is that you've recently been tested, you're responsible, you're thoughtful, and you have these conversations with your partners. Who knows if he really does? But I was like, this is in your defense, positive, right? Yes, this is what you're telling me, but you're telling me in a way that's also indicating you don't know a whole lot about what I'm saying, because most people don't. It's no indication of your intelligence. It's just a lack of information across the board. So, but again, it's like, I'm not trying to like freak people out, but it's like, man, if we all knew,
if we could just get a wake up call,
change. Yes, it would change things. These campaigns, back to that, that's what I was originally started talking about when we were thinking about whether or not stigma has changed. These campaigns, I'm like, man, like the CDC, the American Sexual Health Association. I'm on the board of the National Coalition of Sexual Health. You should join us, by the way.
Oh, I would love to.
You'd really enjoy it, and they would love your input. And and individuals with organizations kind of like ours and stuff can join, and I would be happy to be like, yes, please include her, because we meet once a year and we do like some information sessions, and I mean, I just think you'd really enjoy it. So,
I would love it.
Anyway, so where was I going with that? I sit on the board in the boogers. Now I totally just lost my thought. Usually it comes back, but well, anyway, okay, maybe I will come back to that. But there was a reason why I mentioned that, and now I can't remember.
So we're just talking about kind of the stigma, where it's going, and as educators, like what could we do, and how does it show up in testing, and the perception of if you're negative and what that means, and
Oh yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Is so on this board are folks from the CDC and the American Sexual Health Association. Like they put all of this money into all of these testing campaigns, you know, and they're just, the STI rates are increasing. I mean, and that's interesting in and of itself too, because it's like, that's the big, you see that in the media every year when the CDC comes out with their report of where the STI rates are at, and they do that, and then immediately the media jumps on board. And is like, oh my gosh, STI rates are rising. We're all dying. We're all
Right.
awful, promiscuous people. And it's like, well, our population is increasing.
True.
So what's just correlation does not equal causation, right? So, correlation does not equal causation. So what is the real reason that STI rates are rising? I'm still curious about the additional details behind that. Are what you'll read in the fine print and the CDC data is it says that these are the reported cases. So that does not include people who, like myself, were diagnosed visually by a practitioner,
And I was diagnosed visually also. Do you know,
so
I've
you
never
wouldn't have been
had
in
the
those
genetic
numbers.
testing.
Oh
No, I
no!
take that back. I did. I had the genetic, not genitally, but because I have it, you know, both places.
Okay.
So I was misdiagnosed. Something kept on showing up on my face. And I was like, I think it's herpes. And the doctor was like, no. And I was like, look, I have genital herpes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And will you please type it? Like, I really want to know. And sure enough,
Yeah.
it was one, but it was diagnosed, you know, as impetigo, and, you know, and so anyway,
Mm-hmm.
so going back, I was initially visually tested, and I've never had a blood test, and I've just had a culture. So there are a lot of people out there that don't know or aren't tested. And as you know, the medical provider is not required to put that information in the data bank if it is herpes, back to the CDC.
Back to the CDC. And the CDC does have this disclaimer in small writing that says these are only the reported cases, the cases that are required by health departments and things like that. And some medical practitioners are reporting, but it's not all. And I mean, a very vast majority aren't reporting, and a lot of STIs aren't even included. So the number, it even says the number is likely much higher. So then when we look at this number and we say, okay, the number's higher and the STI rates are rising. Well, what's rising is the number of reported cases. Does that mean that more people are getting tested? So, and our population is increasing? Like, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's more infection across the board. It means that more infections are getting reported to the CDC, and there can be a number of reasons why. Ooh, our internet connection is funny.
Yeah, I see that. That's okay. It looks like you're back.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, but you're striking a pose there.
There we go. All right. Ooh, that's better. Okay.
Okay.
Is that better? So so that's interesting to me too, because then it's again where this is the media and culture perpetuating this fear and this stigma, and that's by reporting it that way, like, oh my gosh, rates are rising, we're all horrible, and you know,
we're all gluttonous
or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's like, actually, no, there just might be more cases being reported. Maybe, maybe there's more testing being done. Maybe population increase naturally. There's more people. It's going to be more infections. Like, I don't know. To me, I'm not sold on this craziness, but it's just, again, it speaks to how, we've got some ways to go in terms of stigma. I would love to be able to tell people that, oh yeah, we're making such a big difference, but and it doesn't matter. All the interviews, you know, that I've done, and I'm like, yes, that reaches people, and I get messages back like, oh, I found you in this article somewhere, which is so cool. But so it's worth it, but I don't think it's making a big enough impact yet.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And yet, you know, I want to fix it all. You know, I want people to have get their lives back and get educated, and
Totally.
So, but you know what? I can remember, I don't remember where it comes from. It was that idea of if you saved, you know, one person, would it be worth it? It's like, yeah, done.
Totally.
Right? It's like, that's a human being. And so, so I know that it does make a difference to me, knowing that this work is having an impact. But
it's still necessary.
The last thing I'd love to talk to you about, because you are a spokesperson, which is for Positive Singles. And I get a lot of questions as far as, should I date within the community? Should I date outside of the community? What does it mean to date in something like Positive Singles? Anything that you could, you know, talk about as far as dating online with positive singles?
For sure. I'm so glad you asked, because I get a lot of flack within the folks who are also HSV positive or advocates, like, oh, this is making people feel like they have to only date within their infection category.
Right.
And that's not at all what I think or why I became affiliated with Positive Singles. I feel like, first of all, I've actually never dated somebody who has HSV. Not intentionally. I've never sought it out, and I just
I
have
haven't either.
never. You haven't. So
I haven't either.
many
And
like
I didn't even
parallels
know,
between us.
I didn't even know it existed. Like, I didn't even know that was even a possibility. So I didn't even know I had a choice, honestly.
Didn't either. And I may have tried it actually years ago, or even a few years back, but I didn't know until I started doing the STD Project that even existed as well. I agree.
Yeah.
Like, even though there's a lot of members on Positive Singles, I just totally didn't know. I didn't know that there's an online Facebook community where you can find people and chat about your experiences, and people date within that community.
Yeah.
And I just had no idea. I just totally did not know that there were people connecting out there. I just was 100% feeling alone for forever. So and those are all great. I mean, I feel like everybody, because we're all so very unique, there's no one size fits all on how to work through this and how to approach it. Like, even with the advice that I give on having the conversation and wait, like, move past it and you can do it and all of that, I realize that everybody is going to take their own pace. I took years to go through it. Some people get past it really quickly, and some people find the resources, some people don't. Some people just get past it because that's who they are and that's their personality. And it just all depends on your perception, your background, and manner, and so many things in influence how this all goes. So for me, Positive Singles is a good stepping stone or launch point, a good way to get your feet wet if you are absolutely petrified of having that conversation. So that's usually where people tell me that Positive Singles was helpful to them. Some people find mates in their lifelong partners. Some people just make some new friends. Some people are like, it was not good for me. I just felt like it was not what I wanted and wasn't a good fit. And I'm like, that's all right. There is no one size fits all. There's no one fit for anybody in this kind of scenario, I guess. So yeah, my thought process is, if you are absolutely, I can't even imagine having this conversation ever, the last thing I want you to do is hide in your house for 9 years. I mean, man, I wish I would have met this person, a couple of years ago or before this ever happened. And don't lock yourself in. Don't stop, because I think the nice part about it is you start with Positive Singles. The people who choose to go that route will start and they're like, wait a minute, I still got game. Like, I still got it. I'm still attractive. I'm still interacting and interested. And it helps remind you, like, nothing has really changed other than you just received a diagnosis that has to do with your physical body, but it doesn't change who you are in what you have to offer in a relationship and why you are valuable and an amazing person and any of those things. So I think it's a great way in which to approach it. But for some people, it's just not the right fit, and that's awesome. And that's what I keep hearing is like, man, I wish you didn't do that, because I just feel like it tells people that that's the only thing they can do. Like, they can't be dating a person who is negative for HSV. They only have to find people who are positive for the same infection. And I absolutely 100% don't believe it, because I've never done it. So why would I tell somebody something that I've never done? I mean, I don't feel good about that. So I'm like, no, it's just one option. And I'm all about having as many resources out there as possible. We say that at the STD Project. Like, if you found us, cool, so glad you did. But if you don't love my tone, if you don't love an article you read, if you don't love everything on our site, then here are some other additional sites to check out, or find your own. And I'm all about advocating for yourself. Like, I will be an advocate. You're going to be an advocate for folks forever. And that's kind of like my life's mission, I've decided. However, nobody can advocate for you better than you can advocate for you.
Absolutely.
So that's just one way in which to do it, is to date within, and then go back out into the regular pool, into like the every other day pool. And interestingly enough too, like the dating sites, like OkCupid and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Kitty again. There's there's other ways in which, like, some people just disclose right in their profile. Some
Yeah.
people use the number. So on the keypad, have you heard that too? They spell out herpes on the keypad. So it's like 43. I have to look at it on my phone.
No.
It's like 437374, something like that. It's 4 3s and 7s combination. And so that's like the kind of DL, down low way of disclosing that you have herpes without necessarily just coming right out in your profile. So you may see that if you're on a more traditional dating site. So yeah, and I like it too, because it provides, the other thing is it provides a link to media to say that just what I just said, like there's all different ways in which to approach it. We're all unique individuals and unique special snowflakes. So do what serves you and what makes you feel good about the process. As long as it's ethical and you're not hurting anyone and you're advocating for yourself, I'm all about doing whatever fits. If you're not hurting anybody else, go for it. Like, get a bazillion tattoos like I have if you want, like, as long as you're not harming anyone else, do what makes you happy and empowered. And at the end of the day, if somebody doesn't love it, well, moving along, there's a bazillion things to see, so go for it.
Exactly. So many people out there.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that'll be a good place that we can kind of start to wrap it up. I would love to have you share a little bit more if there's anything you want to share with the audience about what the STD Project is doing, or how they can find you, or any of that all that good stuff, about what you're doing. So if you want to just share a little bit more about the STD Project and what you're up to.
Sure. I'm on all the social media, so feel free to reach out that way. It's funny too, because we get like about 120 to 150,000 views per month on the website, but my social media is like, I might have like 1,000 to 2,000 followers or something. But again, this speaks to the stigma, because nobody wants to, and this is interesting when you think about it, because nobody wants to like the STD Project, quote unquote.
I know, isn't that crazy?
Yep, because they're so paranoid. Like, if I like this, then people might think that I have a direct correlation. But what's funny is, like, I can like the Susan B. Komen Foundation. I can like Wounded Warriors, and nobody thinks I'm a wounded warrior or I have breast cancer. Nobody makes that assumption.
Great
but
point.
People are so paranoid about that. And I'm sure you found the same thing, that like you get a lot of views and a lot of emails and stuff like that, but nobody wants to. Even my friends are like, maybe there's like, it tells you how many of your friends have liked your personal page or your page on Facebook or whatever, and it's like 100 out of the 1,000 friends I have or whatever. And it's I'm sure it's for the same reason. Like, heaven forbid they think that the reason they're supporting, friends think that the reason they're supporting the work is because they also have an infection. And
Pink. Totally. Pink Tent, we've had the same thing. It's like, we've had the discussion. It's like, how do you get this information out there to an audience that they want the information, but they don't want to raise their hand saying, I want it, right? It's like, right. It can be challenging that way.
Exactly. It can. That's why I've made like Instagram and some of those profiles. Oh, shoot. I'm so sorry. I think that's my internet connection.
It's okay. It's funny,
like
on my screen, I keep on seeing this, like,
it happens,
this green bar that goes around our faces, and it goes back and forth. And I have no idea how that's going to end up in the recording. So I'll just speak to that. When you all are watching this in the video format, there might be some bouncing around, but here we are. Technology.
Okay. Yeah, exactly. You never know what hits. It works great until it doesn't.
Right.
So lastly, we're working on at the STD Project. So that's how to find me. But if you don't like something, like, I will still, everything's still there, and you can still see what I'm up to without necessarily, you can basically cyber stalk me without having to like and support audibly or visually.
There you go.
So that's the only thing I've done to help that a little bit, but otherwise I'm like, well, hopefully people find the resource on the website itself. That's why, to me, like, a lot of folks have really found a lot of success with social media, and they do even more work than on a traditional website. But we still find that the website is so necessary, because people are Googling, and then they can go without anyone knowing where they're going for research information. Like that.
They can always clear their cookies, can't they?
Exactly. So, I get that. And we're working on, right now, we're launching 11 additional websites. So
wow.
A couple, I know I'm a little overly ambitious. I'm like, I don't know why I decided 11. That's what my husband said to me the other day. He's like, why
That's
did
a
you
lot.
decide to do 11? I'm like, I don't know. Overachiever, I guess. I'm not sure. But we purchased a couple of years ago herpes.education, chlamydia.education, so molluscum.education, so on and so forth. So basically all the STIs, a lot of the main ones anyways, .education. And so there's, if you went to it right now, you'd see that there's a site there. There's just not a lot of information. Like, I'm building the infrastructure. And the idea behind those is to provide a real, like, deep dive into the individual infections. So we don't talk a lot on the STD Project about like clinical trials and stuff like that going on, as well as like all the different treatments or over-the-counter things that you can do and more reviews and stuff like that. So that's what we want to really go into, is like, if some, especially it's mostly going to be targeted, I think, then toward folks who are diagnosed. So we're also going to have interviews and things like that. So we'll have them in both locations. So yeah, just a big deep dive into each individual infection, and just to try and provide a little bit more. The kind of real theory behind it was just to get out there more on Google so that people can find the resource. And then eventually, if they hop off and go someplace else and seek additional resources, that's awesome. We like to refer to folks and everything like that too. But yeah, just to help people find us and make a little bit larger of a spread and cover a bit more ground. So we're working on that, but it's slow in coming, because everything I do now I have to multiply by 11, which this little thing takes 11 times the amount of time, you know. So something that took me 1 minute is now 15 minutes of work. So it's just, anyway.
I admire you. That's awesome. That's awesome.
We'll get there. Thanks. So yeah, that's about it.
All right. Well, it's been a great conversation. I've really enjoyed it. I love the flow of it, and how our little kitties have been like in the background with us. And I just really want to thank you for, sharing, and also what you're doing. I mean, it takes a special person to stand up, and I know that you are making a difference in so many people's lives. And if you didn't have that strength and that courage to stand up and speak up, then these individual interactions and these individual people that are finding you, wouldn't be helped, because there aren't a lot of accurate, inspirational information resources out there. So I'm so glad to have you out there as my colleague. And we will continue this conversation, and I would love to learn more about that board too. So
excuse me.
Yeah.
I'm going to send you information, and we would love for you to be a member. That would be awesome.
Awesome. All right. Well, we will talk soon. We'll go ahead and signing off at pinktent.com, our podcast for women who are looking to discover hope, healing, and vibrant health. All right. Signing off.